I will be concluding this presentation with a cooking demonstration. Now, inspired by my mentor, Alice Waters, I don't believe in just talking about food without having the sensual pleasures of the table present. And one of the things that really drew me to the culinary arts and making the decision to go to cooking school was that I understood that our industrialized food system has taken the practice of cooking away from so many of us. You know, this practice that in generations before was passed down is something that so many of us don't have the privilege of learning from our elders. Our industrialized food system, our fast food culture, our processed packaged convenience society that we live in, there's very little incentive for many of us to practice cooking. And so it's one of the reasons that I started writing cookbooks. I believe that if I imparted fundamental cooking skills, it would empower people, especially young people, to get into the kitchen, to think about ways that they can practically employ, something like, as I mentioned in my talk, we might see these things as apolitical. Cooking, growing food from scratch, gathering around the table. But I argue that these are highly political in our industrialized food system. And I think that, cooking skills are something that we should all understand is integral to not only kind of healing the earth, but also having a healthier diet. There's a growing body of research that the more we cook at home, the more healthful our actual diet is. And so this recipe is from my book, Afro-Vegan, which is a collection of food recipes that really explore and celebrate foods throughout the African diaspora through the lens of plant-based cooking. And, one might argue that, or people might believe, vegan cooking, that's kind of this, modern thing that you're imposing on this traditional diet. But even if we trace looking at the diets in West and Central Africa, many of the traditional diets, these are largely vegetable-based. And while the kind of popular imagination of Black food is the kind of deep-fried meats and overcooked vegetables and sugary desserts, these are the kind of stereotypical ways in which many people understand Black food. But in terms of the traditional ways that African Americans grew food, cook it, and ate it, these are like, if you think about the staples of Black cuisine, collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions, black-eyed peas, sugar snap peas, pole beans, butternut squash. These are the kind of staples that any Western-trained allopathic physician or nutritionist or dietitian should say we should all be eating. So inspired by this West African concept of Sankofa, which is looking backwards as we move forward, I would argue that this body of work that I've created is really forcing us to pull back, to think about these traditional food ways and how we can incorporate them into a modern context. So the recipe that I'm making is, it's a tofu curry with mustard greens. And it's actually inspired by a Tanzanian dish that I learned from a friend. And I love this recipe for a number of reasons. One, while this uses tofu, I am very clear that I think there's a lot of dogmatism when it comes to diet, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that diet is a very individual choice. We all need to think about our own bodily constitution, our health status, our age. There are a number of factors that should play into what we're eating. And it may be perfect for you to have one specific diet at a moment in your life, but we need to listen to our body and think about the way in which it's constantly changing and shifting, and really check in with our health team about how we might want to shift our diet to meet its needs accordingly. But the thing I like about this recipe is that you can easily substitute whatever protein source you might want to add. So say you like chicken, you want to add lamb, you can add this to the dish. So I do use tofu, which is a protein source that's predominant in a lot of vegetarian and vegan cooking. I do argue that it's often overused, and I rebuke the boring and kind of like stereotypical way in which people just delete meat and add tofu. Where there once was a steak, now I'm going to have a big block of tofu and brown sauce. We're not doing that here. In fact, I often avoid using things like tofu and only use it in the way that it might be used traditionally in Asian cooking, very sparingly. But this is one of those dishes where I employ a technique of roasting tofu, which gives it a lot of kind of meatiness and bite. And cooked in the right way, it actually can be very tasty and filling, because that's one of the complaints that a lot of people have with a plant-based diet is I just, how can you get enough protein? How can you feel full if you aren't including animal products? I think there is kind of a overestimation of the amount of protein that we need in an American diet. I think you can get protein from a lot of sources, legumes, and protein is in different grains. But for this recipe, we are going to use tofu. And the way that I actually prepare the tofu, which I'm not going to do here on stage, obviously because we're not in a demo kitchen, is simply roasting it. And the technique involves preheating an oven to 350 degrees, lining a baking sheet with parchment paper, taking the tofu, tossing it in a little olive oil, salting it, and then placing it on the baking sheet and roasting it for about 30 minutes. I probably check on it every 10 minutes or so just to turn it to ensure even cooking. And what that yields is a very crispy, kind of golden exterior and this creamy interior. So really delicious. As I mentioned, feel free to substitute whatever makes sense for you. Before I get into the recipe itself, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the benefits of making stock. First of all, let me ask this. How many people in here actually cook? Do we have any people who cook? Okay. You guys are all gourmands. Is this below your, should I just stop this now? You guys have this already. Do I even need to do this cooking demonstration? Okay. So, I do want to talk about the benefits of stock. Now, having gone to culinary school, for some reason, there was this kind of psychological barrier to me making my own homemade stock, and then it just clicked one day. I will say that we're at a point now where you can get a lot of really good quality and tasty vegetarian and vegan boxed and bottled stocks, even vegetarian and vegan bouillon cubes. So I'm not as self-righteous and stuck up about using those things as I was a decade ago. But the thing about stock that you make at home, first of all, it's super easy to do, but it's pretty incomparable in terms of the cleanness and freshness of flavor. In fact, my wife and I make a big vat of vegetable stock every weekend. And what we do is we make the stock, we cool it down, we transfer it to ice cube trays, freeze those, and then we'll transfer the trays to Ziploc bags, because obviously for a soup or a stew or something of this nature, the stock makes sense, but anything that requires water, if you're making rice or quinoa or some type of grain, you can substitute the rice or the water with stock to give it more flavor and a little more depth. Now, when making stock, simple ingredients: a couple of carrots, a few onions, a head of garlic, and you don't even need to peel the onions. You could simply quarter them. The garlic, I would say, open it up with the butt of your hand, maybe take a butt of a knife just to kind of smash the different garlic, cloves. What else? Some mushrooms, if you want the stock to have a little bit more umami and depth, maybe a little bit of, bay leaves. So we add all those ingredients, and there are a number of stocks you can make. In the wintertime, I do more of what I call a rich stock, when I take the vegetables, toss them in oil, roast them for about an hour. That way they have more depth and sweetness, and so that might be for more winter stews and tagines and things of that nature. But take the vegetables, add about 2 quarts of water, bring it to a boil, lower the boil to a simmer, partially cover it, let it cook for about half an hour, sometimes up to an hour and a half if you really want to extract all the nutrients. And then you simply transfer it to a colander, press the solids, and you have this rich, flavorful, delicious stock. So make stocks at home if you can. The first thing I do with this recipe, so here's the thing. we could talk about curries and the kind of problematic nature of this term. This spice blend that is seen in a lot of South Asian cooking and places in the South Asian diaspora is simply a melange of different spices. Now, I often get, one of the main pieces of feedback that I get about my cookbook writing is that they're time intensive and they're labor intensive. People feel like, oh my God, Bryant, I have to make 3 recipes within a recipe just to get the final dish. And the reason that this plays out is because I'm an advocate for slow food and slow cooking. Now, I realize that this type of cooking practices may not be convenient during the week, but one of the things that our kind of fast food culture has done is just, it always has us on the go. It always has us thinking about how quickly we can do things. And I encourage us to slow down. These recipes are the type of things that I would say you want to make on the weekend. Not only, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, I think capitalism often has us convinced that we have to address any problem that we have individually. I'm really pushing for a more communal way of understanding how we address larger systemic problems, but even the kind of everyday issues that we might have. So I want to encourage you to think about how you can connect with friends, family, and community to make food. So yes, it may be cost prohibitive for you to go to the farmer's market and buy a lot of fresh ingredients and get a lot of spices and herbs. But imagine this. What if everyone on this front row got together on the weekend and we went to Dr. Jenkins's kitchen, which has this amazing, wolf range and lots of equipment. And then, we went to the farmer's market. We all pooled our money and collectively bought ingredients. We come back, we make a range of dishes together. Then we have fresh, delicious, home-cooked dishes that we've made together that we can divvy among the group. Many of them we can freeze, and we have fresh food that we can eat throughout the week. And not only that, we're building community. We've gone to the farmer's market and we've supported the local farmers instead of the multinational supermarkets. The farmers that we're supporting at the farmer's market get up to 90 cents on every dollar that we spend. And we're ensuring that we're supporting those who are growing food with integrity, with an eye toward sustainability, and with care for everyday eaters like you and me. So my plug to think about how we can collectively feed ourselves and not just do it for our individual selves or our nuclear family. Are you guys feeling me on that? Are you guys gonna practice that? You guys gonna work on that? Tell your parents to do it too. So the first thing that I do with this blend is I'm gonna add mustard seeds. And the thing about a blend like this, going back to the kind of labor-intensive way in which I think about recipes. Of course, you could probably go to any conventional supermarket and get a curry spice blend, right? But the thing about making these blends yourself is that, one, you can customize it to make it fit for your own tastes and desires. Say you like a little bit more ginger, or you want a little bit more heat. You can add more chili or cayenne or add more ginger. I do recommend, if you can, when using fresh spices, to get the whole spices instead of the pre-ground ones. As much as my mother likes to cook, I don't know why she has this drawer at home that has spices in there from like the 1970s. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Mom, just clean this drawer out, right? Because the spices are dead at this point. So the thing about getting fresh spices is that, when you get whole spices like cumin seeds, for example, instead of the ground, it's just going to be much more fresh and lively, and that's going to contribute to a fresh and lively dish. When you take the whole spices and then you heat them in a skillet, it wakes them up. It brings out the natural oils, and it's just going to add to an overall dish. So I always say that, one of the cornerstones of good vegetarian and vegan and plant-based cooking is using fresh, like really good quality spices. It's going to add so much to the dish. So when using them, add them to the skillet, wake them up. You can get a mortar and pestle and you can grind them, or you can get a clean coffee grinder and grind them. And so it's going to add a lot to the dish. That being said, I understand that that may not be convenient, and you certainly can use pre-ground spices instead. Now, if you have the resources, if there are places, co-ops or conventional markets that have bulk spices, then I would suggest getting them in smaller quantities so that you can use them. Because the thing about these spices is they lose a lot of their punch as time goes by. So within like 6 months or a year, they're gonna be less fresh than they would have been 6 months prior. So we have our mustard seeds in here, and as soon as they start to pop, that means that we're ready to move to the next step, which is adding our onions and a little bit of olive oil, being one of the healthier fats. And so I'm simply gonna saute this over medium-low heat. And we don't need to caramelize these. We can cook these for maybe 3 or 4 minutes until the onions are translucent, and then that's gonna take us exactly where we need to be. So our onions are cooking. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the spice blend. We have some cardamom, which is a staple spice used in South Asian cooking. We have a little onion powder, ginger powder, some turmeric, chili powder, garlic, black pepper, and some fresh ginger. So the next thing I'm gonna do is add our minced garlic, and you don't wanna cook that too long. You just wanna cook it just until it starts to smell fragrant, which will let you know that it's ready to go. I do wanna offer you this as a tip. If you're ever having a gathering in which food is present, as soon as your guests start to come to the house, get you a skillet, combine olive oil and a little garlic, get you one of these oscillating fans, and then like just let that garlic essence permeate your house. It always impresses people. You could be having like a dessert buffet and people are like, oh my God, garlic. So highly recommend that. Once our garlic is smelling fragrant, we could just start dumping and stirring our ingredients. So our cardamom powder, our garlic, our ginger powder, our turmeric. So we want to stir these as we're mixing them. Our chili. And I'm going to save the black pepper, but I am going to add our ginger. And we want to stir this quickly because spices will burn. So make sure you get those incorporated. And this is an important stage at which you add the spices, because what you don't want to do, and I'm going to add this, our tomatoes while I'm talking this through. You don't want to let the garlic or the spices burn. And so you just want to cook them just until they start to smell fragrant. And you want to add them at this stage where you have your alliums, your garlic, and your onions, because what you want to avoid when making a soup or a stew is dumping in spices into this big vat of liquid, because it's going to prevent the spices from fully incorporating. And what it'll do is just they're going to clump up in there. So when you cook them with your alliums, it coats them and then it ensures that they're evenly distributed throughout the dish. So as you see, I am just kind of moving things around while scraping the bottom of the pan, and we added some canned tomatoes. Now you might be saying, Bryant, I wouldn't expect you to use canned tomatoes. I think you want to go to the farmer's market, go to the supermarket and get fresh tomatoes. Now, I am typically pretty adamant about using fresh ingredients. However, with tomatoes, it's one of those ingredients that I do make an exception for, and I am totally fine with using canned tomatoes. Why? Because typically if you find a good organic brand, and I don't like promoting brands, but I will say that Muir Glen is a really good organic tomato brand that I use often. With this brand and with other good quality tomato brands that are organic, what they do is they will harvest the tomatoes at their ripe of peakness, and then they immediately process them so that they're really flavorful. They have a lot of the nutrient density. As you know, in our industrialized food system, you can get anything from any part of the world at any time of the year. You can get strawberries in the dead of winter. I think that in accordance with this idea of eating sustainably, we need to think about the traditional ways in which people have eaten, which is seasonally. You know, understanding the wisdom of the earth. Obviously, during the winter the winter months, The earth is producing more grounding things like root vegetables and tubers, and that's what we should be eating, things that are warming and grounding as we're staying in, as we're preparing for the, just to kind of be in for the winter. And during the summer, when it's hot and when we're perspiring a lot, we need things that are more hydrating, and that's when we get a lot of tomatoes and strawberries and these cucumbers, these high water vegetables and produce. And so I think a part of eating sustainably is listening to Mother Nature and eating in season. So I'm going to add some peanut butter. Yeah, I think this is peanut butter. This is peanut butter, but peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter. One of the important ingredients of this this dish is some type of fat. Now, I do understand that a lot of people have tree nut allergies, so if you can't eat peanuts, you certainly can use any other type of nut butter. But we need, in addition to the olive oil, which gives it some fat and some depth, this peanut butter or whatever nut butter you choose to use is going to give it so much more depth and make it more filling. So we add our peanut butter and we stir it to mix it thoroughly. And we'll add a little bit of the tofu or whatever your protein choice is. And then we want to add our stock. So if you can boil a pot of water, you can make this dish. Now, one of the keys to being efficient in the kitchen, which I should have talked about earlier, is being organized. Now, as you saw, there were all the ingredients that were kind of in their separate containers. All the spices were in their little ramekins. And, in the culinary world and the food world, this is called the mise en place, which is French for everything in its place. Now, I promise you, I'm not trying to be fancy and chefy. When encouraging you to do this, what I want to do is to help you to be a more efficient home cook. So even before you think about cooking or prepping anything, I recommend that you read the recipe thoroughly. That being said, I hope that eventually you don't need recipes. And I know I'm going to run myself out of business by saying this, but I think the goal is that you should be so adept at, cooking and have the fundamental skills that you are using what Vertime Smart Grosvenor, the anthropologist and author and actress, calls vibrational cooking, where you're using your intuition in the spirit of jazz improvisation. You're using what's on hand. You're just kind of flowing. And then, on that note, the recipe actually calls for mustard greens, a staple in American Southern cooking, but mustard greens weren't available. So the culinary team here actually gave me collard greens. And this really leads to my contention that recipes should be used as a guide. If you're growing collards or Swiss chard at home and the recipe calls for mustard greens, by no means, please don't go out and buy this leafy green. Use what's on hand. And I think that goes for whatever ingredients. If you don't have peanut butter and you have cashew butter at home, use that instead. So it's really about making these recipes work for each individual and their family and making things as easy as possible. So we're going to add our collards or whatever leafy green one decides to add to this dish. We'll turn the heat up a little bit. And so once we have our greens in here, that's pretty much it. We want to let this simmer over medium-low heat for maybe half an hour, and then we'd finish this off with a little cilantro, some minced jalapeno peppers or whatever pepper of your choice, and then serve it with rice, with bread, whatever starch makes sense. And this is a simple and easy dish, and this is something that you can make in bulk. You can freeze so that you can have some for now, and then you have some that will be available later. I truly hope that I've not only inspired you to think more deeply about the larger structural issues in our food system, how we all should be invested in solving these problems, because I think we're all aware that, we can think about the most historically marginalized communities, the communities on the margins, as a canary in the coal mine. What's happening with many of these communities right now, we need to understand that that's simply a foretelling of what's going to be impacting all of us. And so when I think about an issue like food justice, this is such a systemic issue. I don't expect for you all to abandon your majors and then be committed to food justice activism. But I do think that we all eat, right? We all eat in here? Yay or nay? And so we all should be concerned with creating a more healthful, just, and sustainable food system. And I think whatever talents and skills we could bring to kind of bringing us to a tipping point, we should bring those. You need chefs, you need designers, you need scholars, you need journalists. We need all hands on deck to really work towards what I would argue is one of the most important movements of the 21st century. I thank you for having me here today. I'm so excited about this commitment, this focus at Base College on food justice, and I'll see you in the afternoon at the cooking class.